July 4, 1945. Camp Swift, Texas. The sun burns down on barbed wire and dry dust as smoke from long rows of grills drifts over hundreds of prisoners. A small group of German women, captured helpers of Hitler's army, are marched toward the smell of roasting meat. Sure, this must be a trick, or some cruel show by their enemies. Instead, an American sergeant holds out something they have never seen before, a soft white bun, a steaming sausage, bright yellow mustard, red sauce. Hot dog, he says, for you. They came expecting beatings and bread crusts. They got a holiday feast and a taste so strange and joyful it shook everything they believed about America, war, and themselves. This was not a propaganda film. This was real life, and one simple meal would follow them all the way into the new Germany. Stay with me to the end to see how one hot dog helped turn enemies into witnesses of democracy. And if you like true World War II stories told this way, please subscribe, like this video, and support the channel so we can keep bringing you the full stories history almost forgot. May 1945, northern France. The war in Europe was over, but on a dusty country road a small column of German women still walked with their hands raised. Their grey uniforms were faded, their boots worn thin. They were not frontline soldiers, but clerks, telephone operators and signals helpers from a rear area staff. Now they shuffled past burned-out trucks under the watch of American guards. One of them was 24-year-old Liesel Weber, a former secretary from Cologne who had joined the army as a communications helper. She had grown up on Nazi newsreels and party meetings. In those films, Americans were crude and cruel, half-civilized men who would do anything to German women if they ever reached German soil. As she later wrote in a short memoir, "We heard they would cut our hair, shame us, starve us. We thought captivity would be worse than the bombs." The first paradox came quickly. At the temporary cage near the front, a US sergeant did not shout or strike them. Instead, he pointed them toward a field kitchen. The smell met them first. Real coffee, boiled potatoes, some kind of meat stew. After months of thin turnip soup and bread mixed with sawdust, the rich, greasy scent almost made them dizzy. Each woman received a metal tray, a ladle of thick stew, a full potato, a slice of soft white bread. White bread. Liesel pressed a thumb into it and left a mark. "We expected blows and hunger," she wrote. "Instead, they handed us white bread, so soft my fingers sank into it." Behind the wire, they could hear German civilians begging for scraps outside the camp fence. The prisoners were eating better than many free people at home. This wasn't propaganda, it was reality, and it made no sense. Within days, the women joined hundreds of other German prisoners on a transport to a port on the Atlantic. They were told almost nothing. Rumors rushed down the line. They would be sent to dig graves in France, to mines in North Africa, to factories in England. No one guessed the truth. The United States Army had space and supplies. It was shipping them across an ocean. The troop ship that took them west had room for more than 2,000 prisoners. They were packed into metal bunks 3 high in a long, echoing hold that smelled of oil, rust, and human sweat. The Atlantic crossing lasted nearly 2 weeks. The ship rolled and shook. Some women lay seasick on thin mattresses, gripping their buckets when the engines changed tone. Here, too, the numbers told a strange story. By mid-1945, more than 370,000 German prisoners of war were held on American soil, guarded not by secret police, but by regular army units and sometimes by older reservists. Liesel and her group were part of a much smaller minority. Only a few hundred German women ever reached the United States as prisoners. Yet on this ship, their status as enemy women brought no special cruelty. They received 3 meals a day. There was white bread at almost every meal. Twice a week, they even got eggs. One of the women, a former nurse named Hilda, whispered to Liesel one night when the hold was dark except for a single red lamp. "If this is how they treat enemies," she said, "what must life be like for their own people?" It was a simple question, but it cut through years of slogans about decadent democracies and Jewish plutocrats. The food did not lie. When the ship finally slid into an American harbor, Newport News, Virginia, the women were hit by a wall of new smells: harbor mud, diesel fumes, hot metal, roasting coffee from a plant somewhere along the docks. Cranes clanged and creaked overhead. Trains waited on thick, well-kept tracks. There were no bombed-out shells of buildings, no burned trams. To Liesl, the port looked like a film set for some fantasy about a world without war. From the harbour they were loaded into rail cars, this time not cattle cars, but standard passenger coaches with seats and windows. Guarded, yes, watched by MPs with rifles, but still far better than the trains fleeing the bombs in Germany. As the train pushed south and west mile after mile, they saw wide fields, tidy towns, gasoline stations with full tanks, and shops with unbroken glass. They were travelling more than 5,000 miles from home, into a land they knew only from hateful posters. The train finally slowed in the heat of central Texas. Outside they saw guard towers, long low barracks, and far in the distance, a pale line of hills under a hard blue sky. A sign identified the place, Camp Swift. The complex spread over about 18,000 acres, a small city of war built on open range. As the doors opened, hot, dry air hit their faces like a blast from a furnace. Dust crunched under their boots. Somewhere nearby a bugle sounded. The women stepped down onto American soil for the first time, still expecting that the kindness they had seen so far was a trick, that the real punishment would surely begin inside the fence. They would only learn how strange this new captivity was when they passed through the gate into the women's compound and met their new daily life behind the wire. The gate clanged shut behind them, and the sound seemed final. Inside the wire, the women expected mud, tents, maybe straw on the floor. Instead, a young American lieutenant led them down a straight gravel road past neat rows of wooden barracks. Each building was long and low, with screened windows and a number stenciled in black on the end. "This is the women's compound," he said slowly, careful with his English. "Separate from the men. You will be safe here." There were guards in the towers and a double row of barbed wire around their small world. But the first shock was not fear. It was order. The gravel paths were swept. The grass around the buildings was cut. At one corner stood a small garden where someone had tried to grow flowers in the hot Texas soil. Inside their assigned barracks, the air was cooler. Rough wooden floors, 2 lines of metal bunks with thin but real mattresses, blankets folded at the foot. A narrow aisle ran down the middle. At the far end, a big metal stove stood ready for winter. For now, the heat pressed in through the walls. Liesl put her hand on the mattress. It gave slightly under her palm. Back in Cologne in 1944, she had slept on a cellar floor during air raids. Later, in the last months of war, she had shared a straw sack with 2 other women in a drafty school gym turned billet. Now, as a prisoner, she had a bed to herself. A corporal read the rules in slow, clear English while a German-American interpreter translated. They would answer roll call twice a day. They had to stay inside the fence unless given permission. There would be work assignments, but no one would be forced to do hard labor against the Geneva Convention. Any disobedience would bring punishment, loss of privileges, extra duties, maybe solitary confinement. "Discipline without blows," one of the women muttered in surprise. It was a strange mix. Strict rules, real fences, and yet no shouting, no raised fists. That evening they met the camp food for the first time. They lined up outside a low mess hall. The smell floated out: boiled vegetables, meat fat, coffee. Inside, the noise hit them. Tin plates clattering, spoons against metal, low talk in German and English. They were handed standard army mess trays, the same shape as the ones the American guards carried. On the trays that night were a scoop of beef stew, a big spoon of mashed potatoes, canned green beans, and 2 slices of soft bread. A pale square of something called margarine sat on a small compartment. At the end of the line, a soldier poured black coffee from a huge pot. Later, Liesl would remember this first dinner in America more clearly than many bomb raids. The meat was not much, she wrote, small cubes in gravy, but there was meat. Real meat, not dried scraps hidden in turnips to fool us. And the bread, how do I describe that bread? It was like cake compared to what we had in Germany in 1945. Back home, the official daily bread ration in many cities had fallen below 300 grams, often bulked out with fillers. Here, they soon learned, the camp tried to follow US Army standards for prisoners, around 2,800 to 3,000 calories per day, with meat several times a week. In a world where German civilians sometimes survived on half that, the numbers were hard to believe. This wasn't propaganda, it was reality laid out on metal trays. Not that life was easy. The women woke at 5:30 each morning to the sharp blast of a bugle. The summer heat climbed quickly toward 100 degrees. Dust worked into clothes and hair. Some were sent to wash laundry for the hospital, to peel potatoes in hot kitchens, to sew and mend uniforms. Others worked in the camp garden, turning dry soil, hoping for tomatoes and beans. They were counted again and again. Guards walked the fence line, rifles over their shoulders, boots heavy on the gravel. At night, bright lamps on high poles washed the compound in white light, so there were no shadows to hide in. Freedom had vanished into schedules. Breakfast at 6, work from 7 to noon, lunch, work again, evening roll call at 6, lights out at 10. But even in this controlled life, the paradox only grew. On Sundays, they were allowed to attend a short church service in a simple wooden chapel shared with other prisoners. Once a week, they could take hot showers in a bathhouse with concrete floors and real drains. Thin towels were stacked in piles. The water, when it came on, thundered against their skin. The first time she stood under that hot spray, Hilda felt months of dirt and fear run down the drain. "I had not been so clean since before the war," she later told her grandson. "I almost cried in the shower." Everywhere they looked, there was enough water to bathe, enough electricity for lights all night, enough food that the kitchen sometimes threw away crusts and peelings. One American guard, a farm boy from Oklahoma, wrote home in August 1945, "Our Jerrys eat better than folks back home under the ration points. If Mum saw what goes in the garbage, she'd tan my hide." The women heard about starving children in Berlin and Hamburg from new arrivals. They knew cities lay in ruins. Yet here in Texas, on 18,000 acres of army land, enemy women were sleeping on mattresses, eating meat and drinking coffee. Each evening, when the work was done and the sun finally slipped low, they sat on the wooden steps of their barracks. They talked quietly, trying to fit what they saw into what they had been told. Were the Americans pretending, acting kind for some reason they could not see? Or was this the true face of a country they had been taught to hate? They would not have to wait long for an answer. As July approached, the camp began to prepare for something the prisoners did not yet understand. America's biggest summer holiday, a day when hot dogs and flags would test their ideas more sharply than any speech or class. By late June, the air over Camp Swift shimmered with heat. The women noticed new activity outside their compound. Trucks came and went more often. Men from the quartermaster company unloaded crates and barrels near the big open field the Americans called the recreation ground. One afternoon, as Liesel and Hilda carried laundry past the wire, they saw soldiers setting up long wooden tables under the sun. Others hammered posts into the ground and began hanging bright cloth in red, white, and blue. A scrap of printed paper blew against the fence. In English, it read, "Independence Day Program, July 4th. Back in the barracks that night, the women asked the German-American interpreter what this meant. He explained slowly, 4th of July, our national holiday. We celebrate the birth of the United States. There will be music, sports, food." "Food?" someone repeated. "Special food," he said. "A feast for the Americans and maybe for some of you too, the colonel is deciding." On the other side of the camp, in an office with a humming electric fan and a map of Texas on the wall, that decision was being argued. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrigan, the camp commander, listened as his officers talked. There were almost 3,000 German prisoners on the post now, including the small women's compound. Feeding them every day already took tons of supplies. Did they really need extra on a holiday? At one end of the table sat the quartermaster officer, Captain Frank Doyle, a former grocery manager from Chicago. He had the numbers. "Sir, we can do it," he said. "I've run the figures. If we cut a little from next week's canned fruit and use the meat we've been saving in cold storage, we can put out hot dogs and hamburgers for all personnel, and for any prisoners we invite, 1 serving each. We have enough coffee and flour for cakes. I've already put in a requisition for 4,000 hot dogs, 3,000 buns and 2,000 pounds of watermelon." One of the younger lieutenants frowned. "For enemy prisoners, with meat shortages back home? My mother has ration coupons for every scrap of bacon and we're giving sausage to Germans." Harrigan tapped a pencil on the desk. He had been in the army long enough to see both the front and the rear. He also remembered the orders from higher headquarters. The United States had signed the Geneva Convention. It had chosen to use fair treatment as a weapon of ideas. "We're not doing this because they deserve a party," he said. "We're doing it because it shows who we are. These women grew up on Hitler's stories about us. If they go home someday saying, 'The Americans fed us well and treated us like human beings,' that's worth a few pounds of sausage. This isn't propaganda. It's reality, and it works better than any pamphlet." So the plan moved forward. The recreation ground, a wide open patch of Texas earth, became a busy construction site. Men from the engineers built a raised platform for a small army band. Signal Corps soldiers hung loudspeakers on poles. In the mess halls, enlisted cooks mixed huge bowls of potato salad, using dozens of gallons of vinegar and mustard. The smell of it, sharp and sour, carried all the way to the fence. From their side, the German women watched and argued. In the evening, when the sun slid low and the floodlights had not yet snapped on, they sat on the barrack steps and guessed at what was coming. "It is a show," said one woman who had lost 2 brothers on the Eastern Front. "They will call the newspapers. Look how kind we are to the Nazis." "They don't need us for that," Hilda answered. "No one back home will see. Maybe they do this just because they like parties." Liesel listened and remembered the figures the interpreter had shared. The calorie counts, the fact that prisoners here received meat more often than many German civilians. The numbers did not match what she had been told for years. According to Nazi speeches, capitalist democracies were selfish and weak, too divided to be generous. Yet here was a rich country spending its food and fuel on games and grilled meat for victors and prisoners at once. A few days before the holiday, a notice went up in German and English. "Voluntary attendance at Independence Day celebration authorized. Proper conduct required. No mixing of compounds without permission." The women stood in front of the paper, reading the careful lines. "Voluntary," Liesel said, "so we can choose not to go?" "Who would choose not to see it?" someone else replied. On July 3rd, the cooks tested the grills. Long metal racks were dragged into place. As the first charcoal caught, a deep, smoky smell rolled across the camp. Fat dripped and hissed on the hot metal. Even from inside the women's area, the scent of grilling meat was clear. It settled into their clothes, into their hair, stirring a hunger that was more than physical. That night, sleep came slowly. Some women lay awake imagining what the food would taste like. Others worried it would all be some trick, that at the last moment the Americans would laugh and send them back to their barracks unfed. Years of fear did not vanish in a few weeks. In the darkness, Hilda whispered from the bunk above Liesel, "If they feed us the way they feed their own men on their own holiday, then I will believe this country is not what we were told." The next morning, the bugle would sound as always. They would form up, walk out of their compound under guard, and step onto the recreation field. The smoke from the grills would be thicker, the tables piled higher, and on one of those tables lay a food none of them had ever seen before, a simple American hot dog, waiting to change how they saw their captors and themselves. July 4th, 1945. By late morning, the Texas sun was already harsh, beating down on the bare ground of the recreation field. The women from the compound marched in 2 lines, an armed guard at each side. Their dresses clung to their backs with sweat. Ahead of them, smoke rose in blue ribbons from a long row of metal grills. There were sounds they had not heard since before the war, a brass band warming up with bright, brassy notes, men laughing in groups, the clatter of hundreds of plates and cups. Over 2,000 American soldiers crowded the open space, mixed with nearly 1,000 German male prisoners brought from their own compounds. The women, only about 30 of them in all, felt small in this sea of uniforms. The smells struck first: charcoal, sizzling fat, coffee, something sweet and sharp from big tubs of potato salad. It wrapped around them like a cloud. Liesel's empty stomach knotted. She had eaten breakfast at dawn, oatmeal and bread, but that felt long ago. The guards led them to a set of tables marked off at one side for prisoners. A sergeant with sunburned arms and a tired smile stepped forward. He spoke slowly, pointing as he went. "Food first, then you can watch the games. No trouble, understand?" The German-American interpreter repeated the words. They joined a line that moved past a row of American cooks in white aprons. First came a scoop of potato salad, cold and creamy on the plate. Then a thick slice of watermelon, its red flesh shining in the light. But what caught their eyes was the stack of soft white rolls next to a metal pan full of short pink sausages. One of the cooks, Sergeant Bill Carter from Missouri, picked up a roll, sliced it open in one quick motion, and laid a hot sausage inside. Steam puffed out. He squeezed 2 bottles over the top, one yellow, one red. The colors were almost too bright. "Hot dog," he said, holding it out. "Very American. Try." The word dog made several women flinch. Liesel stared at the thing in his hand. She knew German sausages of every kind: bratwurst, bockwurst, thin frankfurters eaten with dark bread, and sharp mustard. But she had never seen a sausage in a soft bun like this, never with tomato sauce on top. It looked like something from a picture book, not real life. Hilda leaned close and whispered in German, "Do you think it is even meat?" Liesel swallowed. Her mouth watered from the smell of the grilled sausage, rich and salty. She took the hot dog carefully, feeling the heat through the soft bread. The bun was so tender her fingers left dents in it. The yellow sauce, mustard, had a sharp vinegar tang that stung her nose. The red, she guessed, was tomato, something she had almost forgotten existed. All around them, American soldiers bit into their own hot dogs without a second thought, talking and laughing. No one watched the women closely. This was not a test or a trick. It was just lunchtime. "Bite," the interpreter said quietly beside her. "It is all right." Liesel lifted the hot dog to her mouth. For a second, fear of the unknown held her still. Then hunger, habit, and curiosity pushed her forward. She took a bite. The first sensation was the soft give of the bread, unlike the hard crusts of wartime German loaves. Then her teeth broke through the skin of the sausage with a faint snap. Hot juice flooded her tongue. Salty, savory, real meat. The mustard bit back with sharpness. The red sauce was sweet in a way that shocked her. Sugar had been rare for years. All of it together was almost too much. She stopped chewing. Her eyes widened. For a heartbeat, she could only hold the food in her mouth, letting the flavors spread. Later, she wrote, "I did not know food could be like that. It was not just to fill the stomach. It was happy food." Beside her, Hilda finally gave in and tried her own. She made a small sound, half laugh, half sob. "Ach du lieber Gott," she whispered, wiping sauce from her lip. "They eat this just for fun?" A private from Texas watched them and grinned. "Tastes better than kraut, don't it?" he joked, to no one in particular. One of the German women, who spoke a little English from school, answered softly, "It is like a feast." Statistics could have told the same story. That day, the quartermaster company issued around 4,000 hot dogs and nearly as many buns, plus hundreds of pounds of potato salad and more than 2,000 pounds of watermelon. For the US Army, with its vast supply lines and factories back home, these were small numbers. For women who had counted every gram of ration bread, it felt like standing in front of a mountain. As they ate, something shifted inside them. These men were their captors. The women wore simple dresses and camp-issue shoes. The soldiers had rifles and authority. The fences and guard towers were still there. Yet the people who held power had chosen to share this food on their national day, without demand or lecture. It was a simple act, but it cut across years of stories about Yankee cruelty. Liesel watched an American captain pour coffee for an elderly German prisoner whose hand shook. No photographer waited nearby. No officer gave a speech. It did not feel staged. If this is how they behave when they do not need anything from us, she thought, what else have we been wrong about? When the plates were empty and the last drops of coffee swallowed, the band struck up a march. The games began. Races, tug-of-war, a baseball match the Germans did not understand. The women sat in the thin shade of the bleachers, full in a way they had almost forgotten was possible, and tried to make sense of a world where enemies gave hot dogs to prisoners. But the day on the field was only a beginning. In the weeks after that holiday, the ideas behind that meal about freedom, fairness, and how a rich society used its wealth would reach them in other ways, in classrooms, in books, in quiet talks with guards who did not act like monsters. The weeks after the 4th of July settled back into routine. Roll calls, work details, dust and heat. But inside the women, something had shifted. The memory of that soft bun and salty sausage stayed with them. It was a small thing, yet it made them watch the Americans more closely. In late summer, a new notice went up on the barracks wall. It was written in English and German. Education program, voluntary classes in English, history and civics, open to all prisoners. Some of the women laughed. What use is school behind barbed wire? One asked. But others were curious. The classroom was an old supply hut, cleared of crates. Long wooden benches faced a blackboard. The air smelled of chalk, old paper, and hot pine boards. An overhead fan turned slowly, pushing warm air in circles. On the wall hung 2 flags, the stars and stripes, and a plain white cloth marked POW Education Center. Their teacher was a middle-aged woman in a simple dress, not a uniform. Her name was Mrs. Peterson, a former high school teacher from Wisconsin who had volunteered to come south with her army husband. She smiled often, but did not act soft. "I will speak slowly," she told them, "and we will learn from each other." A German-American sergeant stood nearby to help with translation. The paradox was sharp. Here were German women who had worn the Reich's eagle on their sleeves, sitting in a camp run by their enemies, learning about the very system their government had called weak. "We learned about freedom while we were not free," Liesel later wrote. It was a strange feeling. At first, the lessons were simple. Numbers, common English words, the names of the 50 states. But soon Mrs. Peterson moved to civics. She drew 3 boxes on the board and labeled them President, Congress, and Courts. Through the interpreter, she explained how laws were made, how the president could be voted out after 4 years, how judges could say no, even to powerful men. One day, she wrote a sentence in big letters. All men are created equal. She told them it came from the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Liesel felt a familiar resistance rise in her chest. At home, equality had been mocked as a lie. But Mrs. Peterson did not pretend her country was perfect. She added other words under the first: slavery, segregation, Indians. Then she talked about black Americans who had been slaves, about native peoples forced from their lands, about the fact that even now, in 1945, not everyone in America enjoyed real equality. A murmur went through the room. In German schools, the women had never heard a teacher list her own nation's sins on the board. Criticism was for enemies, not for yourself. "How can you say such things?" Hilda asked at the break, through the sergeant. "Are you not afraid?" Mrs. Peterson wiped chalk from her fingers and shook her head. "No," she said. "In a democracy, we are allowed to say when our country is wrong. We must say it or nothing changes. That is the point. This isn't propaganda. This is reality. Sometimes it is ugly, but we try to make it better. The numbers behind her words were real too. By autumn 1945, more than 2,000 prisoners at Camp Swift had attended at least one class. Across the United States, Army records later counted over 30,000 German prisoners taking part in some form of education program before they went home. Enemies were being taught how American democracy worked, in the hope they would carry the idea back across the ocean. News from Europe filtered into the camp through Red Cross bulletins and new arrivals. German cities lay in ruins. In some areas, more than 40% of housing was destroyed. Food was scarce. The average civilian ration in parts of Germany had fallen below 200 calories a day that winter. Liesl read one report twice and pressed her lips together. In Texas, prisoners still received more than twice that amount. It was another painful contrast. In early 1946, new orders came down from higher command. The United States would begin sending German prisoners home in large numbers. They had helped with farm work, with building fences, with cleaning camps, but the war was long over. America did not want to be a jailer forever. The announcement hit the women's compound like a storm. Some cheered the thought of going home, even to rubble. Others felt sick. "I want to see my mother," one woman said. But what will I bring her? Hunger? In the classroom, Mrs. Peterson did not give them easy comfort. Instead, she spoke quietly about rebuilding. She told them that after America's own Civil War, people had faced burned towns and empty fields, and yet they had replanted and repaired. "You will have hard years," she said, "but you will also have choices. You have seen 2 systems now. You know how each one treats its people. That knowledge is also something you can take home." When the last class ended, she shook each woman's hand. Her palm was warm and dry. "Remember," she said to Liesl, searching for simple words, "good government is like good bread. It must be made fresh again, and again, or it goes bad." They walked back to their barracks under the same bright Texas sun they had met months before. The fences still stood, the towers still watched them. Yet in their minds, new doors had opened. They had eaten the food of a free society, and now they had seen how that society tried, however imperfectly, to explain itself. Soon trains and ships would carry them away from Camp Swift. What they had learned there, about hot dogs, yes, but also about laws, votes, and honest self-criticism, would travel with them into a broken Germany that had to decide what kind of nation it wanted to be next. The train that took them away from Camp Swift in 1946 felt different from the one that had brought them. Back then, they had arrived as captured helpers of a defeated army, full of fear. Now they left with suitcases, Red Cross parcels, and small English notebooks from Mrs. Peterson's class. Outside the windows, the Texas sky was the same hard blue, the same long fences, the same guard towers. But inside, the women's thoughts had changed. At the last roll call, an American sergeant read the names slowly. Around 200 German prisoners from Camp Swift would go on this transport, including nearly all the women. That was only a tiny part of the more than 370,000 German prisoners who would be shipped home from the United States over 1945 and 1946, but for each of them, the numbers did not matter. What mattered was the question, what waits for us in Germany? On the platform, the air smelled of coal smoke and hot dust. Liesl took one last look toward the camp kitchens. The memory of that July day rose clear in her mind. The steam of the sausage, the softness of the bun, the shock of sweet tomato sauce on her tongue. "I never thought a hot dog would be my strongest memory of captivity," she later joked to a friend. But it was. Hilda held her small Red Cross parcel with chocolate, soap, and a tin of meat. "We go from plenty to hunger," she said quietly as the train jerked forward. "But at least now we know plenty is possible." The ship home was crowded and noisy, full of men in worn field grey, and a few women like them. In the evenings, leaning against the rail, they told stories. Most spoke of air raids and lost homes. Liesl and Hilda spoke of Texas. When they described white bread you could press flat, or showers with endless hot water, or a holiday where prisoners ate the same meat as their guards, some listeners shook their heads in disbelief. "Americans treated you like that?" one former sergeant asked. "It must have been some special camp." "No," Liesel answered. "I think that is simply how they wanted to be seen, by us and by themselves. This wasn't propaganda. It was reality. We could taste it." They arrived in a grey German port under cold rain. The air smelled of coal, wet ash, and the sour stink of bombed buildings. Where once there had been warehouses and offices, now there were blackened walls and piles of brick. On the walk to the reception centre, their boots crunched on broken glass. Here, the numbers were grim. In some cities, more than a third of homes lay destroyed. Food was so short that many Germans lived on 1,000 calories a day or less. The women's American coats and solid shoes marked them out. At first, neighbours eyed them with anger. "So," an old woman snapped at Hilda, "you ate American meat while your own people starved?" Hilda did not deny it. "Yes," she said, "and because I did, I can tell you something. The world is not just what the party told us. The Americans are not saints. They have their own sins, but they also have laws and courts and leaders who can be voted out and food enough that they share it even with prisoners. We must learn from that if we want to live better than before." In the years that followed, the women's lives spread out like branches. Liesel found work as a translator for a local office of the new West German government, helping with paperwork tied to American aid. She handled forms stamped ERP, the Marshall Plan, which would send more than $1 billion worth of goods to West Germany by the early 1950s. Bags of American flour, crates of machinery, even tins of meat passed through her hands. Sometimes, when she saw American canned sausage on a list, she smiled and remembered the hot dog in Texas. They had come as conquerors, they left as students, she later wrote in a short article for a women's magazine. "We thought we knew everything about strength. Then a victorious nation showed us that real strength can look like fair rules and shared food." Hilda returned to nursing in a small town. On warm evenings when the new houses smelled of fresh plaster and cut lumber, neighbours gathered in back gardens to grill sausages. The crackle of charcoal, the hiss of fat on hot metal, it all reminded her of that 4th of July. She taught her children a simple rule: never trust any leader who needs to lie about others to make his own country look good. Not all the women stayed. In the 1950s and 60s, a few emigrated to the United States under new visa quotas or to join family who had gone before. One of them, a quiet former signals clerk named Marta, ended up in Milwaukee, the same kind of Midwestern city Mrs. Peterson had described. At her first American backyard barbecue, she stood over a small grill as the smell of cut grass and smoke filled the air. When her new neighbors handed her a hot dog loaded with mustard, she bit into it and closed her eyes. "It tastes like freedom," she said, half teasing, half true. By then, West Germany had become a democracy with regular elections, a free press, and a strong economy. The choices of millions had built it, but the memories of thousands of former prisoners also played a part. In letters, memoirs, and simple kitchen table stories, they told the next generation, "We saw another way it could be done. We saw a rich country that did not have to be cruel." Their scattered lives, tied together by the memory of a single meal, point to a larger truth that reaches far beyond Camp Swift into the history we all share. In the end, the story of the German women at Camp Swift is not mainly about fences, guard towers, or orders typed on official paper. It is about how small, ordinary acts can change the way people think. A soft bun, a hot sausage, a teacher who admits her country's faults. These things cut deeper than slogans or threats. The women had come to America as part of a conquering army. That failed. They left as witnesses of a different idea, that real power is not shown only in bombs and tanks, but in how a nation treats even those who once tried to destroy it. They had come as conquerors. They left as students. In the end, America's greatest weapon was not its bombs, but its abundance.